All right, so in this section, we're going to talk about another rule you should observe while writing for four-part harmony. So there is a particular way you should approach the doubling of notes in harmony. For the fact that in harmony, you're making use of a triadic chord. That's a three-note chord, right? And here we are dealing with four parts. So it means we need an extra one note to complete the fourth part, right? So this brings us to the concept of note doubling. That is, you are going to double one of the three notes that make up a given triad you're going to use to harmonize a particular note, right? You are not going to import other notes. It has to be any of these three notes. For instance, when you have C, E, G, right? So of course, you have to double one of these three notes to make up for the four parts. So this is where the concept of note doubling comes in, right? So the question is, what is the right note to be doubled? So this is what we're going to discuss in this lesson. As a rule, the best note to be doubled in any chord is the root. So in the case of C, E, G, the best note to be doubled is the root. So C should be doubled in the case of this chord. That is in the case of chord 1 on C major. The root should be doubled. Now, the rule says you can also double the fifth so that we have C, E, G, and so in this case we have two G's. We have C, E, G, and another G, right? If it is a major chord, the third should hardly be doubled. Okay, it's as if you're having too much of salt in your cooking. It means the third of every chord is like a sweetener, right? And you shouldn't have too much of it. So it shouldn't be doubled. So in a major chord, you can only double the root or the fifth. Another way of note doubling to achieve four parts is by tripling the root. So you're having more of the roots, right? So you can have C in three places. In this case, you omit the fifth, right? So in this case, you triple the root, you omit the fifth, and you retain the third. So the third should be there, right? Like I said the other time, it's like a sweetener. So you should not do without it. So while writing for four parts, the third should not be omitted. As a matter of fact, in order of importance, the root is the most important note of a chord because it gives the name, the signature of the chord, right? It gives the sense of the chord. It defines the chord. So that's what the root does, right? Just like the names imply. So without the root of a tree, it means the tree dries off. So the root is very, very important and followed by the third. The third is like the sweetener. So you should also include the third. So those are the two important notes in a chord or in a triad, right? You can do away with the fifth, but the root and the third should always be there, right? Just like when you have this chord, it is not really complete without the third. So in this case, do, mi, the mi is very, very important. And of course, without the root, the chord has no shape. So the root should be there. And the third also should be there. But you can do away with the fifth. So those are the ways of approaching note doubling in harmony. But let's talk about them in these examples. So we have our example here on C major, chord 1 going to chord 5 again. Chord 1 and chord 5 are major triads, or they are primary chords, right? They are primary chords. So you should always think of doubling the roots at all time, right? So that's the first option. When you're writing for harmony, you always think about the best thing to do, right? What's the second best thing to do? What's the least thing you should ever do? Always try to avoid the least thing you should ever do, right? So now the best note to be doubled is the root. If the root doesn't work, then you double the fifth, right? Or if that doesn't work, you can triple the root while still retaining the third. But the least thing you should ever do is doubling the third, right? So we have chord 1 going to chord 5, and it goes this way, right? So in the first one, You see that we double the root. So we have C doubled in this case. So we have C3 and we have C5, both represented here, right? And the third is there and the fifth is there in the case of this chord. So we have this, right? So we have chord 1 there. And in chord 5 here, we also have the root doubled, the root being G. So we have G2 and G3 represented here, and we have D4 as the fifth. We have our B4 as the third, right? So we have chord 1 going to chord 5, right? So this is perfect. Now let's see other options, right? So we still have another arrangement, but in this case we have our root tripled. In so doing, we omit the fifth. So the fifth has been omitted here, but the third is still there. So we have our C3, C4, and of course C5 present here, right? While E, the third, is retained. So we have this arrangement, right? And in this case, let's see what happened in chord 5. We still have our root doubled here. So we have G2 and G4 being represented here. We have our third and we have our fifth here. So you can have this arranged. So chord 1 going to chord 5. So this is correct. Now again, for the fact that you are keeping a particular rule doesn't mean you should break others. Remember, going back to our previous class, the correct spacing of parts, right? That's soprano, alto, and tenor. The interval between adjacent parts here should not be more than 1 octave, and we keep it. Between soprano and alto, we still have our sixth here, and between tenor and alto, we have our third. So it's correct. And when you look at what happens here, it's still very much correct because we have a sixth here and a fifth here. So very correct, right? So we are still within the range. And for bass, this is more than 1 octave, but not up to 2 octaves. So we are still within the range, right? So it's correct. So let's see the next one. We can also have this kind of arrangement. In this case, let's see what happened here. So we just end up doubling the fifth, right? So you should also think of doubling the fifth, but that should be a second option, right? That should not be your best option, because when you double the fifth, you've actually weakened the quality of the chord, right? You have actually weakened the roots of the chord if you have more of fifths. But it's still very much okay to double the fifth, and that's what we have here. The fifth has been doubled. So we have the G3 and the G4 represented here. So we have the G3 and the G4 represented here. So we have C, E, G, and E, right? So we have this chord. Very okay, because the interval between this G and this G is just 1 octave, and it's correct. Let's see what happened in chord 5 here. So we also double the fifth here. Mind you, the third has been retained, right? Just like the third has been retained here in this chord 1 on C major, right? So this is very much correct. The chord sounds this way: chord 1 to chord 5. So we have chord 1 to chord 5, right?